So whether you're a seasoned DIYer or a very beginner furniture painter, I have some tips and tricks that are gonna make painting a wood chair so much more simple. And you'll be shocked at the smooth, lovely finish you can get just by using a paintbrush. Hi, I'm Denise at Salvaged Inspirations. Welcome back to my furniture painting DIY channel. Let's get started. Here's the wood Windsor chair I pulled out of my inventory. This chair has seen some things. It was in really rough shape, yet surprisingly solid. They just don't make things like this anymore. And I just want to thank Kathy for inspiring this chair makeover. She left a suggestion about painting kitchen stools. I couldn't find any, Kathy, but I hope this is as close as I could come. I hope this inspires you and you get some tips from it. And whether it's a kitchen stool or a chair that we picked up at a thrift store, inherited from a family, or even found roadside, giving a wood chair a fresh coat of paint is a very satisfying makeover, so I can't wait to share some of these tips. I started by giving this chair a really good cleaning as it had been in storage for many, many years. I used white lightning in a spray bottle mixed with water, gave it a spray, and then using a smaller sponge, cleaning sponge, I got into cleaning all those spindles. It's very important to get all the grease, grime, dust, dirt, anything that's on older furniture. Very important to clean it all off before you give it a paint job. After everything was cleaned and then rinsed with clean water, because I don't want any of the TSP or the white lightning substitute on there, I let this chair dry and then I came back and started a few repairs. And really, this chair had so many dings and pop marks and holes and scratches that there was no way I was going to be sitting there filling everything. So I just gravitated to what caught my eye the most, and that was the legs. The bottom of the legs looked very gnawed at, so I used some wood filler to smooth them out. After the wood putty had dried, it was time to sand. Sanding all these spindles does not sound fun. I totally get it, because I know in one of my older blog posts, somebody was talking about sanding spindles and they said, no way, no how did they want to do it. I wanted to set my stopwatch on my phone to show you exactly how long this took. However, I need my phone to do video for social, so I couldn't do that. So here's my work clock at 11:20 a.m. I brought the piece into my sanding room and started scuff sanding all these spindles. What saves a lot of time when scuff sanding spindles is using a spongy sandpaper. They're very flexible. They will form right around the spindles, and you do not want to be taking all the finish off these spindles. What you want to do is just scuff up the existing finish for paint. I worked my way around the upper level of spindles, then the lower level, making sure that each side was scuff sanded nicely. And here I'm just showing you what difference it should look like. The one spindle that's been sanded, you can see that the color is very different than the one that has not. This is because the existing finish has been scuff sanded and it's starting to dust up. I worked my way around all the spindles and also doing the back of the chair, the seat of the chair, the legs of the chair. This does take longer than, say, a flat face dresser would take, because I can scuff sand a flat face dresser within 5-10 minutes. So I was actually curious how long this took me. I ended up brushing off all the dust in my sanding room. Then I brought it back into my paint room. And the time was almost 11:45. So this chair took me longer to sand with all these spindles than an actual dresser would have, which makes sense. There's a lot more detail to it. And I hope you guys find this helpful, because if you're working with a set of chairs, like let's say that you have 4 chairs and each chair takes 25 to 30 minutes, that gives you a guesstimate of how long it would take you to sand and prep the set. So I propped the chair on a work table and then using a tack cloth, removed all the additional dust. Now for the fun part, painting. I flipped the chair onto the arms so I could start bottoms up. Now here's one of my biggest tips and takeaways for painting spindles and painting chairs. Skip the primer and get yourself a really good all-in-one paint. It doesn't matter what brand, because there's so many all-in-one paints out there that are exceptional. They work very, very well, and this will save you so much time and money. I chose this Anchor Silk all-in-one mineral paint. It has the primer, paint, and top coat all included, and it's a gorgeous, rich, true black. I'm also using Dixie Belle paintbrushes, which are quality paintbrushes. I do suggest getting yourself the best brush that you can afford. But other than that, no fancy tools are needed. You do not need a sprayer to get a really nice, smooth finish. You don't need to be buying spray cans unless you so choose to do so. If you want to spray paint your chairs, that's another good option if you have outdoor or a space to do it in. But if you just want to go the paintbrush route, you have a paintbrush at home, we usually do, and just get an all-in-one paint. And I'm going to show you how easy this is. Also, just for reference, I'm sharing how much paint I started with in my jar. And I would say I probably have about 3/4 of the jar in here. And since we timed the sanding, let's time the painting. I was very curious as to how long it would take to paint all these spindles as well. I started by painting the bottom of the seat, and I used very light coat of paint. I don't like adding heavy coats onto the wood furniture, because 2 light coats or even 3 light coats will give a much smoother, nicer look on a chair than 1 or 2 heavy coats. Also, another great tip is starting on the bottom of your chair gets you kind of warmed up for the paint job. It'll make you feel comfortable using your paintbrush, using the brand of paint that you bought, and it's a good starter because nobody sees the underneath of the seat, so it's a great place to start. Another chair painting tip that I'd like to add is if you have any imperfections in your wood chairs, the best color to use would be black and or a darker color, like a dark navy blue or a very dark charcoal. The darker the color, the more it's going to hide any imperfections you may have in that wood. Also, that includes the top coat as well. If you're using a dark color to hide imperfections, you don't want to be slapping on a gloss top coat afterwards, because that's going to reflect the light. So the darker you can go, and the sheen, a matte or a satin sheen is the best for any of your chairs that have imperfections that you'd like to hide. Now for getting a super smooth finish on these legs, I added a tiny little bit of paint onto the tip of my paintbrush, and I started with my slap it on technique. And here you can see that I'm slapping it on, and I am painting the circumference of the leg rather than up and down. And this will leave you with a super smooth finish. It'll look like a spray-on finish just with using your paintbrush. And you don't have to do this fast. You can slap the paint on or brush the paint on the circumference in a slow manner. You could do it in a fast manner or anything in between. It doesn't matter. The point is you want to get that paint on nicely, the circumference, not going up and down. The first coat, like regardless of anything that you paint, whether it's a flat surface, a rounded surface, the first coat you are going to see the imperfections. The magic happens when you lay down the second coat of paint. When I'm doing this chair, I make sure to get all the angles. You want to get underneath the spindles. You want to get on the sides of the spindles. You want to make sure that you have paint coverage on the full circumference of all these spindles. I'm guessing somebody's going to say something about my walls. So I'm just going to address that now. I did not cover my white walls before I did this slap-on paint technique. Why? Because there's not enough paint on the paintbrush to be slapping it on and having it fly everywhere. If your paint is flying off that paintbrush, you have way too much paint to be doing this paint technique. You want your brush fairly dry. You just add a little tiny bit of paint to the tips. You put it onto the spindle and then you start spreading it out. There should be no paint that's splattering. Here's a look at what the undercarriage of this chair looked like with the first coat, and it is 20 after 12. So that took me 25 minutes, the bottom part of the chair. I removed the chair from the work table, I put it on my floor, and I started painting the top of the seat. And here you can see how I'm dabbing the paint into all these scratches and crevices and dings. And once I do, I'm going to say magically disappear. They don't disappear, yet they're not that noticeable. So again, here's a great example is if you want to hide imperfections, a dark color is amazing to do that. I'm going to be using this Windsor chair to stage and style my painted furniture. And I kind of like that it has so much character. As I was painting it, I was imagining, wonder how old this chair is and what it's seen and where it's been. I think this chair has some stories to tell. And here I am painting the bottom tier spindle after I painted the seat. And again, slap-on technique, very little paint on the brush, and I just have fun with it. Another tip when painting wood chairs is to take your time because there are a lot of details with these spindles. So as I'm painting the armrest, I really have to make sure to get in between each and every spindle and make sure there's no drip marks. Now you can ensure that by not overloading too much paint onto your brush, but I always backtrack and make sure everything looks clean and neat and there's no excess paint anywhere. So before I show you guys the clock and how long it actually took, do you want to take a guess down in the comments below? How long do you think this entire chair took to paint from start to finish? It's like a game show. Let's see who comes the closest. So I finished up and here's the first coat painted onto this Windsor chair. And the time is 12:53 and the start time was 11:55. So to hand paint this entire chair, including the undercarriage and all these spindles, it took me 30 minutes. We're just going to round about 30 minutes on the bottom, 1 hour on top. So an hour and a half to paint the entire chair, and let's round it out to a half hour of sanding. So again, hopefully this gives you an idea. If you're working with a set of chairs that has just as much detail, then you times that by, say, 4 or times that by 6. If you're working with a wood chair that has much less detail, you can probably cut this time in half. And I'm curious if any of you guys guessed right. And let me know if you find the timing of these projects, because I can add it in if you find it helpful. So I let everything dry overnight and I came back the next day to add my second coat. The second coat took me half the time it took to do the first coat. It took me like a half hour, slightly over a half hour to put this second coat on. I don't know why that is. I think because the second coat is just more finessing. And again, I really got the paint into all those dings and crevices and cracks, and I just worked my way around the entire chair. The second coat is the opportunity to look at the chair at all different angles and then really focus in on maybe those little areas that you missed with the first coat, or the little areas that went on a little bit thinner. It's the time when you're going to even everything out and give 100% coverage. And once I had finished painting the entire chair, again, it took me around a half an hour. It took me about half the time as it did painting the entire first coat. But here's how much paint we have left in the container. I would say I used about a quarter of this 16-ounce jar. So again, that's about let's say 4 or 5 ounces to paint this entire chair. Again, it's not a lot of paint, and I hope this you find helpful, because if you're doing a set of chairs, you just time that by 4 or times that by 6. This 16-ounce container should do 4 chairs, no problem. And if you guys are interested in the products that I'm using, the paintbrush, paint, etc., I'll have everything linked down below for you. After the paint, second coat was 100% dry. It did not need a third coat. This had great coverage, but I wanted to give the seat of this chair a little more character. So I pulled out this Midnight Garden decoupage paper. It's so pretty with the florals and the birds and the black background. I thought it would add to this vintage chair. I laid it down on the seat and kind of mapped out the design. And I took a tip from one of my SI blog readers, or maybe it was a comment here on YouTube. I don't remember, but somebody told me to tear the paper rather than cut it. I have to admit, I was a little apprehensive because I've never torn a decoupage sheet before, and I was trying to do it half decently and not make a mess, if that makes sense when you're tearing any sort of paper. I did kind of goof on the bottom flower there. I tore it a little too much and had to do a patch job afterwards. But overall, I think this turned out quite well. And here I am doing the patch job. I just kind of tore around the bottom of that flower and patched them together because I thought that that looked much better than having the flower, a half flower. Once I had the design mapped out, I took Dixie Belle Clear Coat in satin, a paintbrush, and I added a nice coat of it to the seat of this chair. You can see that it goes on very milky, so you can see exactly where you're laying your top coat. It dries nice and clear, but it goes on fairly milky, especially over the black paint. Once I had the seat covered in the top coat, I added the beautiful floral decoupage paper and just placed it where I wanted it and laid it out flat. And we can't forget about the other half of that beautiful flower, so I did a little patch job with that. Once I had everything in place, I took another coat of the satin clear coat and added it on top of the design, making sure to get everything covered, which is easy to do because you can see again exactly where it's laying down. I also started top coating the rest of the chair, including all the spindles. And how I top coat spindles is exactly the same way how I painted the spindles. So I go at them at the circumference from side to side, not up and down. So you're going to do the same paint technique for the spindles, for the paint, and also the top coat. After the top coat on the seat was 100% dry, I took a little bit of anchor paint onto my paintbrush and blended in the decoupage paper onto the seat. So I just added a little bit of black paint in and around. This blended in the sides of the paper very nicely. As a finishing touch, I went ahead and dry brushed the whole floral design. And that was the icing on the cake. I think it gave it just the nice vintage look that I was looking for. And check out how smooth these spindles are. Can't wait to bring it upstairs, stage and style it. So just as a reminder, here's the before. And here's the after. And I really hope you guys can get a good look at how fantastic these spindles really look, just using a paintbrush and a little bit of paint. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial as much as I enjoyed working on it. And I hope it's given you some ideas to update and upcycle some of those old wooden chairs that you have. I'm curious if you'd try this paint technique, so feel free to leave me a comment down below. If you guys also have any other YouTube video tutorial suggestions, I would love to hear them, and I'll keep my eyes peeled for those pieces. Feel free to like and subscribe. You can also find me over at salvagedinspirations.com, where I have over 600 furniture painting and DIY tutorials. You can also sign up for our free email list where you get everything brand new sent right to your inbox. Until next project, have a fabulous week. Bye, guys.